Hello stampers and stampettes. Today we're going to be looking at the Civil Rights Movement on modern U.S. stamps. In this video we will be looking at To Form a More Perfect Union, Scott number 3937. This is a 10-stamp souvenir sheet issued August 2005. It is part of the United States Post Office's 2005 campaign to celebrate the people and events that shaped our nation. These stamps highlight 10 important milestones of the Civil Rights Movement. The front of the sheet has a picture of Martin Luther King and the following quote, which he gave at a commencement speech at Lincoln University in June 1961. The title, To Form a More Perfect Union, comes from the preamble of the United States Constitution. It is the introduction to and a summary of the document's content. It states the purpose for which it was written, the rights of its citizens, and the ideals of the new nation, all of which were intended to last forever. Civil rights are obtained by being a legal member of a certain political state or nation. Blacks became entitled to American civil rights once slavery ended. The Constitution was amended twice to protect these rights. In 1868, the 14th Amendment gave blacks equal protection under the law. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. The amendments were enacted because the rights of blacks varied state by state. Now the rights were protected in a federal high level. However, blacks continued to face discrimination in America, especially in the South with its use of Jim Crow laws. The Civil Rights Movement was a campaign by blacks and others to gain political and social freedom and legal equality during the 1950s and 1960s. It was a hard, terrifying struggle where peaceful protests were often met by cruel and brutal resistance. Our first stamp, number 3937-A, commemorates the Executive Order 9981. Blacks volunteered to fight and die for their country, which in turn did not give them equal rights. Order 9981, issued by President Harry Truman on July 26, 1948, ended discrimination in all branches of the military. This act is said to be the basis of the Civil Rights Movement and fight for legal and racial equality. Next, Stamp B commemorates Voting Rights Act of 1965. This was enacted on August 6, 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. The law banned all voter literacy tests and assigned federal examiners to monitor certain voting jurisdictions. The purposes of literacy tests were to prove that a voter could read and understand English. It was used to prevent non-whites who often lacked formal education from voting. The Voting Rights Act also led to the end of poll taxes, which was a fixed fee people had to pay before they could vote. Like literacy tests, poll tests prevented people of color and poor people from voting. Next, Stamp C looks at the lunch counter sit-ins. Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in all public facilities in the South. Sit-ins began on February 1, 1960, when 4 black college students refused to leave a whites-only Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, until they were served. The action sparked peaceful sit-ins and demonstrations against discriminatory government and business practices. Protesters were often brutally removed by force and arrested for trespassing. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was later formed, and in 1966, one of its members, Stokely Carmichael, created the famous phrase, "Black Power." The next stamp, D, looks at Little Rock 9. In Brown versus the Board of Education, segregated schools were made illegal. On September 3, 1957, 9 black volunteer students attempted to attend the all-white Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. However, a mob and law enforcement sent out by the governor prevented their entrance. President Dwight D. Eisenhower sent in the federal troops to escort the students in and out of the school every day and to escort them to and from classes within the school. The incident showed that the federal government was committed to enforcing desegregation. Next, the Montgomery bus boycott is depicted on stamp E. This boycott was sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her bus seat to a white patron on December 1st, 1955. In response, blacks protested segregation on buses by boycotting them in Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott was led by Martin Luther King Jr. This was his first prominent leadership role in the movement. The boycott lasted 381 days. Blacks gained a victory on November 14, 1956, when the Supreme Court ruled that segregated seating was unconstitutional. As a side note, the first person arrested for refusing to give up her seat was a 15-year-old Claudette Colvin. Since she was pregnant at the time, the movement did not feel that she would be a good role model for the cause. So Rosa Parks was picked to recreate the protest 9 months later. The Freedom Riders, which is commemorated on stamp F. In the case Boynton vs. Virginia, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in interstate transportation facilities was illegal. 7 blacks and 6 white activists left Washington, D.C. on a Greyhound bus on May 4, 1961, to protest at bus terminals in the South which did not comply with the ruling. In Anniston, Alabama, their bus was bombed and they were physically assaulted. Unable to hire a new bus driver, they were unable to continue their journey until U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, brother of JFK, found them a new driver. In Montgomery, Alabama, they were again brutally attacked by the white mob. On May 24, 1961, another group of Freedom Riders were arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, and found guilty of trespassing. The Supreme Court overturned the convictions, leading hundreds of people to join the cause. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. On July 2, 1964, carrying on the work begun by JFK, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law guaranteed equal employment, limited voter literacy tests, and allowed federal authorities to investigate public facilities. As a side note, in order to ensure the bill would not get passed, equality for women was included. The plan was unsuccessful and the law did pass. Next, we move on to the March on Washington. This took place on August 28, 1963, and was organized and led by civil rights leaders such as A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and Martin Luther King Jr. More than 200,000 people of all races attended. The event's main highlight was MLK's infamous "I Have a Dream" speech, which is a maximum for equality and freedom. Now we come to the Selma March, which is depicted on stamp I. This is also known as Bloody Sunday. The march took place on March 7, 1965 in Selma, Alabama. More than 600 protesters attended to protest the killing of civil rights activist Jimmy Lee Jackson and to support laws to enforce the 15th Amendment. The march was led by Hosea Williams, John Lewis, Albert Turner, and Bob Mantas. Governor George C. Wallace sent state and local police to stop them. At Edmund Pettus Bridge, the protesters were viciously beaten with clubs and tear gassed. Dozens were hospitalized. The entire incident was televised and galvanized others to join the civil rights movement, and also influenced the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The last stamp on the souvenir sheet is Brown versus the Board of Education, stamp J. On May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The lawsuit was a class action case filed by 13 black families against the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. At the time, black public schools were far inferior to white public schools, many lacking qualified teachers, having poor facilities, and lacking teaching supplies and resources. The court ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal because today education is perhaps the most important function of our local and state governments. In a second decision in the 1955 case, Brown 2, the court declared that all states end segregation with all deliberate speed. Recently, there has been a resurgence of the civil rights movement with the Black Lives Matter movement, which primarily addresses police brutality against blacks. These are not all the stamps about the civil rights movement. I'm just covering this souvenir sheet for now, and we'll look into others later. I want to give my thanks to those who participated in the movement and made my life today possible. I have to say, I thought I knew a lot about the civil rights movement, well, the basics anyway. Researching the stories behind these stamps show me how little I really know. This shows one aspect of the power and importance of stamp collecting. It can really change your life. In conclusion, I want to say please, LCSN. That's like, comment, subscribe, and notify. Peace out, stampers and stampettes. And remember, there are no set rules in stamp collecting, so stamp how you want to stamp. Bye.